Councillors, officers and members of the public, either in attendance here personally or watching at home via YouTube, welcome to this evening's Democracy and Standards Committee meeting. I will just run through some housekeeping rules. There's no fire alarm drill planned, so should the fire alarm sound, please follow the lead of our officers and exit the building on their instruction and congregate where indicated at the front of the building so we can make sure that everyone is accounted for. Under no circumstances use the lifts, thank you. Please ensure that mobile phones are either set to silent or switched off for the duration of the meeting. The meeting is being recorded and you may be visible on camera. So if this is an issue for you, please let one of the officers present know of your concern. We will now move on to agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence. Carol.
I've had apologies from Councillor Carr, Councillor Hall, Councillor Humberstone, and I believe is Councillor Corbett an apology? Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Well, we're quiet anyway, so... Right, if we can now move on to agenda item 2, which is approval of the minutes. You have the minutes from the additional meeting held on the 29th of September 2025 in your pack. Do I have a proposer for the adoption of these minutes? Councillor McLean. Do I have a seconder for the minutes? Councillor Fedorovich. Can I have a show of hands, please, on acceptance of the minutes? I'll take that as carried anyway. Do we have an abstention? One abstention. Okay, thank you. Oh, let's sign the minutes for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Agenda item 3. Does any councillor present have a declaration in relation to any of the items listed on the agenda that you wish to make, please? If you could state the item, nature of your interest, and whether it is a disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory interest, that would be helpful. Thank you. Do we have anyone? No? Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 4. We will move on to the first report for this evening, which is the Community Governance Review 2025 to 2026, Terms of Reference, and I will hand over to Heather Jackson to present the report.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. So hopefully members will have had sight of the report for the Community Governance Review with the attached draft terms of reference. So just by way of summary, the purpose of the report is really just to review those draft terms of reference with a view to, once they are agreed, actually they'll go to full council for official sign-off. In terms of background, so the Local Government and Public Involvement in Health Act sets out the legal framework for the conduct of community governance review, and it sets out what can actually be covered as part of that review as well. So really what we're looking at, and this is reflected in the terms of reference, is the provision to create, merge, alter or abolish parish areas. It also covers the naming of parishes and the style of parishes. And when we're talking about style, that's when we're talking about whether it's a village, a community or a neighbourhood, or just as like you would normally have a parish council. It also covers electoral arrangements. So electoral arrangements is a term that sort of lumps together various different matters. And this includes the ordinary day of electors, the council size, the number of councillors to be elected, parish wards, if the parish is going to be divided into wards, and grouping and degrouping of parishes. So when we're talking about grouping and degrouping, that's where you may get a very small parish or a couple of small parishes. It's maybe not viable for them to be potentially a parish council by themselves. But what we can do is we can actually group them together and they can be sort of under the umbrella of a single parish council. So that's what we mean by that. So in terms of the reasons for actually undertaking the review, there have been a number of housing developments over the last few years, and in some cases those developments have actually sort of straddled over boundaries, parish ward boundaries as well. So that obviously does need to be addressed if there are some of those situations, which we are aware that there are some of those. There have also been some shifts in populations in some areas as well. So again, it's an opportunity to actually look at those areas and see whether or not, we do actually need to think about, maybe the boundary needs just moving just to reflect that, and whether or not they still represent the local community as well, the interests of the community. Another sort of issue that's actually reflected in the terms of reference is consequential matters, and this is arising from the Local Government Boundary Commission. So this is the electoral arrangements for North Northamptonshire Council, and as part of that review there were some new boundaries that were actually put in for town councils mainly, and again it's a case of we can actually now reflect on that and see whether or not those arrangements are actually still fit for purpose. And there may also be some parish councils as well that may wish to consider the number of councillors that they've actually got. So the terms of reference reflect that broad range of matters that the review can actually consider. So as part of the first consultation, we will be inviting proposals from parish and town councils. And we have already undertaken some informal consultation. So you'll see within the report that there are some areas that have already expressed an interest in actually being part of the review. And obviously we hope that some other parishes may come forward as part of the consultation, because they'd like us to look at some of those areas as well. Within the report is an indicative timetable which reflects the governance process. So obviously, as I've said earlier, subject to approval, the next stage would be to actually go to full council. What I would say in terms of the timetable is just to note that it does cover the Christmas period. So because of that, what we've actually done is added a week onto the consultation in February, just to give that little bit of extra time at the other side of the Christmas break. In terms of consultation, the project team is proposing utilising quite a wide range of different methods to actually contact people. So these will include digital and traditional means of actually engaging. And we'll be looking to make sure that that is proportionate and relevant and sort of takes account of the complexity of the review in terms of different areas as well. In terms of the financial aspects of the review, we are actually working with financial services at the moment in terms of funding for the review. As I say, we will be looking to use low-cost, minimal-cost options for engagement, but there may be some need to actually write to some properties or electors in certain areas. But we are working towards that, and I think the actual funding figure will go into the full council report when it's actually presented to full council. I think that's all I've got to say, unless everybody's got any questions.
Thank you, Heather. Members, if you would now like to ask questions of the officer and debate the report before you. Do we have any questions or queries to the officer? Simon.
So back at when you first came to this committee and introduced the topic, I raised the point around the sort of broader matters that the governance review could consider, and also it was noted that there's this supra-local, ultra-local, hyper-local devolution, and my thought is that there's a potential opportunity. There may not be. That work may have progressed sufficiently far that it's too late. But my thought was that there's an opportunity for this hyperlocal devolution work and this community governance review to potentially be done at one and the same time, because the community governance review gives a credibility to looking at the services that might be provided by parish councils, whereas doing the hyperlocal devolution on its own bluntly can be perceived as a potential cost-cutting exercise. And I say that not necessarily as my opinion, but some of the feedback that I've had from talking to some parish councils who are aware of it. So in terms of, I think that is a potential saving in effort, doing two pieces of work under one banner. I think there's a value in that, albeit I recognise there'll be different parts of the council involved in it. And equally, I think there's a presentation issue that we've got two pieces of work going on that have the potential to cover similar ground. The governance review's got lots of stuff different from the hyperlocal, but I think there's a crossover, and I think there's a perception. So I'll probably explain that too well. But in terms of, I think I fear there might be an opportunity potentially missed, recognising new councillor, looking in, learning things. But I just think there's a potential we could have possibly have combined the two pieces of work and done them as one. And that's just my thoughts.
Do you want to comment, Camilla?
Thank you, Councillor Fairhall, and you're absolutely right. Hyper-devolution was mentioned at the last time we brought this, and actually there was a good discussion and debate around what that would look like. Work is developing, but not at the same pace as the community governance review that we actually are bringing this evening for this committee to consider the terms of reference. The community governance review is actually somewhat more advanced in the discussions than the hyper-devolution discussion. So whilst this is on the forward plan, I believe for December, it's not yet known if it will make that meeting. Those discussions haven't yet taken place internally or views formulated. It could be quite some time off before that hyper-devolution and the engagement work starts to come to fruition. That said, we wouldn't look to miss an opportunity. So as part of the community governance review, Heather and the rest of the team have identified key officers within the council, and can't remember the title of the officer, Kerry Pennell, is part of that particular group, who leads on the town and parish forum, but is also working on the scoping exercise that will go around the hyper-devolution. So we hope to engage them and not miss an opportunity for any of the intelligence that we might gather as part of the community governance review to feed that into that discussion. But certainly at this stage, it is impossible to bring the two together. That has been explored. We know that this community governance review was something that the previous Democracy and Standards Committee were very, very keen to see us bring forward. There was certainly some tension and frustration by members who were not represented at this committee now following the change in administration, but certainly a strength of feeling in the communities that this community governance review needed to take place. The change in the boundaries, which impacted the reduction from 78 to 68 councillors of Northamptonshire, and how the wards were then apportioned, certainly resulted in a lot of feedback to our members. That hasn't gone away. We continue to receive contact from town and parish councils and MP's office to say, when is this work going to be done? So for that reason, we simply don't feel that it's appropriate to delay it. We did consider that, but then we run the risk of not doing it in time for the next election. So whilst 3.5 knocking on for 4 years may feel a long way, we have to progress this work next year to be able to hit that deadline in readiness of the next full all-out elections. So Councillor Fairhall, it's certainly not an experienced thing as to why it wouldn't be appropriate to raise that. We always welcome questions and feedback, and I hope that we are able to work closely with Kerry and the rest of the team to make sure that that valuable work as part of the community governance is shared, and those views continue to be supported as part of the hyper-devolution discussions, which I know members are keen for us to take forward. I don't have anything further to add on that, unless Heather has anything extra.
Thank you, Camilla. Do we have any further questions or queries? Councillor Dudridge?
Sorry, my throat just dried up at the wrong time. How likely is it that the crossing of Westminster boundaries might interfere with potential feedback? Because we've got Glenvale in North Wellingborough, where half of it is in Wellingborough and Rushden, the other half's in Daventry, and if they were to come back and say we'd like to be included in Wellingborough, is there crossover there that's going to need to be considered?
I don't know about that particular boundary. We can certainly look at that. What I will say is West Northamptonshire undertook this exercise in their last administration. We haven't been advised of any feedback along those lines where there had been any crossover, but all town and parish councils are welcome to share their views about where that should be, how it should sit, their numbers, their names. Whilst it's very important to us on the committee and officers, we do find with this exercise the levels of engagement are still quite low. We'll work really closely with our consultation engagement team, but we do find that it's only those voices who we probably already know about that tend to come forward. But I'm sure Heather will take that away to just check on those boundaries if it's something we need to be alive to.
Thank you, Camilla. Any further questions or queries to either Camilla or Heather? Councillor Fedorovich.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think the schedule looks good. I think this is a very needed piece of work. The main point I wanted to make was around the how of the consultation itself. I think I've mentioned this probably many a time. But one of the things I wanted to raise was there were lots of, in their sort of outline of how we would consult, there was sort of a few different things listed, and it was obviously about sort of keeping costs down as well, which I think is also very, very key. But I do think also video is a key element that I feel like was missing in the report. Something that could be utilised both on social media, but also just in terms of business and how a lot of businesses work nowadays. They actually communicate with their teams, sometimes via video and like a summary briefing. I was thinking about the general briefings that we'll do will be, for members, can be half an hour, they can be quite lengthy, whereas actually, and also might not necessarily work with the times that councillors are available. People are very busy or they do council work outside of their schedules, so having something that people can watch back would be really, really helpful, I think. But my key thing was if we can brief clerks and then sort of spread that within our councillors so they have a really good understanding of like what it's about, why it matters. That's sort of one aspect of it. But also, I think it would be really useful for us for perhaps yourself, Heather, if you'd be up for it, but someone with the expertise to do some like a 60-second or quite a short video for external comms, because I think it's the councillors, local councillors, I think would be able to do some of that work themselves as well, and I think relate it to their local audiences. And I also think our youth council could be a really good avenue for this, engaging young people and why this matters. But I think for the general public and also for our councils, we need to get to the heart of why, and just a couple of key points of why this matters. How is this going to impact you? A couple of the key points on that would really help. So yeah, my main sort of point is about that. And also within the briefing to town and parish councils and sort of the clerks, I don't know if we've ever been sort of prescriptive before, and that I guess this is a bit of a question, but potentially a suggestion on what I think could be helpful to maybe town and parish councils who haven't thought about different ways that they can engage, or potentially, I think I'm more thinking about sharing successful ways that other town and parish councils do reach out. And you could maybe glean some insights from some of the town and parish council meetings that you've got. I know that they have those regularly, but things like giving guidance on creating a list of community contacts to help get the word out about things like this. These are finding community champions in different areas. I mean, I think we know that like religious groups, sports groups, things like that can be very powerful for getting the word out. Schools as well, if you've got them on board. But creating those community champions and almost giving a bit of a prescriptive guide, I think would be really useful, because I know that some councils are ahead of the game and some maybe not so. So just having that guidance might be a big help for getting the word out.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions or queries? Councillor Fairhall.
I'm not as up to date with these marketing and communications techniques that my colleague here is. My thought around the communication and consultation would be actually potentially looking at holding them as part of a parish council meeting. I attend. I've got 21 various different types of parish, either parish meetings or parish councils or a town council in my ward, and I get to as many of those as I can. The number of residents present at those sometimes can be counted on one hand. If this is a review about parishes and number of parish councillors, it wouldn't, I don't think, be a bad thing for that to take place in the parish council meeting itself or just before the parish council meeting itself, and those residents then staying and attending and observing a meeting as well. They don't have to, they can choose not to, of course, but I personally think it wouldn't be a bad thing if we're consulting on something that you actually then experience that same thing. So in addition to all of the things that were mentioned, I actually think there's an opportunity. There's 15 minutes at the start of every parish council meeting for public involvement. And I just wonder whether or not that's just an opportunity again of joining a few things up, getting a few parishioners down to their parish council meeting and actually seeing what the hell goes on, because it's excuse my language, because it's very easy to comment upon councils from sitting outside and looking in, as we all know.
Yeah, just come back on that.
Thank you, Heather.
Sorry, yeah. We are actually preparing a parish council information pack, so that will have a lot of information in it. We're working with the comms and engagement team on that. We've also got, because we're using the engagement hub, that has actually quite a wide sort of scope in terms of the people the message will go out via the engagement hub. And also, we have actually thought about some of these things. We do have our own engagement officer within the team. So his role is actually to identify some of these opportunities and actually take that forward. We are looking also at potentially doing some drop-in sessions. Obviously, that will depend on the complexity of the proposals or recommendations for a particular area. But again, we can certainly look at whether or not we can just pop along to some parish council meetings as well. Definitely.
Councillor Dudridge.
Is it something that could be added in the guidance then, that parish councils are encouraged to host specially convened meetings purely to discuss this and have that as your feedback as well?
We can pop that into there to try and engage that, or to try and promote that sort of discussion, if you like, within that guidance pack. We can certainly add something in there. Like I say, we have been in touch with quite a few parish councils already, and they have sort of fed back to us. So they are sort of engaging with it. Again, I think we are conscious of the some parish councils will meet quite frequently, other ones may not meet quite so often. So yeah, that's I think is why we're thinking maybe some drop-in sessions in some areas for people to be able to engage as well. Okay.
Thank you, Heather. Any further questions? Councillor Fedorovich.
Thank you. Sorry, it was just to really quickly come back on that point. There was something I remembered I forgot. Well, one of them, just very quickly while we were talking about the sort of promotion of things, while sort of town and parish councils might do their own sort of social media spreading of sort of information, I think it's also useful to know that if NNC can share our core comms link to a video or whatever we do, and we can comment on that link, link, share, all of that will help amplify that and amplify it with the internal social media algorithms. So it will get better visibility just naturally. So that could be just one extra additional help. And also the video platform that I was going to recommend is called Loom. There are a few out there, but there's you can use it for free. We used to use it at work. It was very helpful.
Thank you. Any further questions or queries for either Camilla or Heather? No? Okay, if I could just make one observation. Tuesday evening this week, I was at a drop-in session in Thrapston Library for the Thrapston Neighbourhood Plan, and that was the last of a series of drop-ins that they've done to engage people rather than, just put a notice up on the town council board. And apparently they've had something like a 4% engagement rate with the electors, which probably sounds awful, but is considering that if you probably just stuck a questionnaire through people's letterboxes, how much would you get back? So possible, drop-in events, going out into the communities. And I think they did, as I say, they did one at the library, they did one at a sports day, they did one at the beer festival. So they've been out and about, at stands and events where there are people about. So maybe that's something to consider as well.
Thank you. And I would just add that we've got excellent advocates here in Democracy and Standards, and Councillor Fairhall's given an example of 21, was it? Parish meetings and parish councils. So we will be sharing communication with all of our members as well. And if you are already involved in a town or parish council or parish meeting, please do spread the word as well. We want to get as much engagement as possible.
Thank you, Camilla.
Ever so sorry, Chair. I don't normally come back this many times, but it was just something that I remembered. A little while back, there was a concern that our North Northampton Council didn't have up-to-date data on emails and contact details for each of the parish councils. I don't know if that's been resolved. It was just something that I sort of remembered, but yeah. Okay, so thank you.
Okay, unless there are any further questions then. You have the recommendation at item 3 of the report, which is to A, review the terms of reference set out as Appendix A to the report for a community governance review of the whole area of the District of North Northamptonshire. B, recommend to full council reserved function to adopt the terms of reference for the community governance review. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Fedorovic, and a seconder, please, Councillor McLean. Can we now have a vote on the recommendation? Those four? Unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, members. And Heather, if you wish to leave, you may do so. I'm sure you're keen to get home. And thank you very much. And we will move on to the next report. And I will hand over to Camilla. This is for the agenda item number 5. This is the Code of Conduct Complaints update.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. This report has a lot of details around the process adopted and implemented and the assessment process for considering Code of Conduct complaints. But actually, the purpose of this report is really to highlight some of the trends and activities that's going on within North Northamptonshire. So following the last reporting period, we've had the elections take place, and we've noticed that there has been, firstly, a change in administration, and we've experienced high levels of newly elected members. Those trends have been mirrored at the town and parish councils where elections have been taken place. In relation to North Northamptonshire Council and its members, a comprehensive training programme took place with a regular programme of member development forming part of our business as usual over the next few years. I'm pleased to say that work is well underway with our Democratic Services team on shaping that, and certainly this committee will have a part to play in what our member development and raising the profile of democracy looks like going forward. We've also set out specific training for Democracy and Standards Committee in early 2026, and as members will see, we've got our independent member here this evening, one of 3 newly appointed and one of our 3 co-opted members. So we now are one of the few fortunate committees where we have actually a full complement of members, co-opted members and independent persons. And with that in mind, we've developed a training session which will take place in early 2026 to talk about the standards arrangements, the process that's adopted, and then we'll move into a piece of work on a mock hearing panel. Now, I am going to talk about some changes hot off the press shortly, and I couldn't not talk about it because they are so significant, but that will not derail that training that we have planned for members, and specifically these members. What I would say nearer the time is if other members who were not part of Democracy and Standards Committee do want to come along to any training, we would never turn any member away who wanted to develop their own knowledge. For the trends, we've noticed that there has been a shift in the trends of the complaint type that we've been receiving. So prior to the election, we were receiving a number of complaints around political speech, predominantly remarks made in the council chamber, some on social media, but those tended to fall within political speech and were protected by the Article 10 rights. We did find that sometimes they seemed at odds with our Debate Not Hate campaign and our own values, and I'm sure that of town and parish councils. But that was certainly a trend that we were seeing in the run-up to the elections. Also, interests, councillor interests. It wasn't necessarily a failure by members to disclose interests. It was a perceived interest when speaking on matters. Since the elections, we've noticed that that has dropped off. We haven't seen that trend continuing upwards or even static. But what does seem to be a continuing trend is around the use of social media. Not at those high levels that we experience, that other monitoring officers are experiencing in other areas, I'm pleased to report, but certainly that is an area that we may wish to do some further training and development with our members. When we do the workshop with this particular committee, there'll certainly be a mock exercise around that, or a scenario of some of the things that hit my mailbox. What is a code of conduct complaint and what isn't, and focused around social media. What I will say is, outside of the code of conduct process, social media, the use of social media, what's being said on social media is a national debate of when does it cross that threshold of criminal activity and the actions that the police can take. And we've seen just in the last month the police saying they may categorise that in a different way going forward. So that's something I'll be keeping a very close eye on and update this committee on. We have had an increase of complaints. We don't report the complaints that are outside of scope, but that we have had so many in volume and requests from the public, the press, former councillors on what we were doing with these concerns that were raised, that I felt it appropriate to bring that to this committee because it may be something that has already been raised with you. So the first one relates to a complaint that was presented to me as monitoring officer back in August of this year. And whilst I can't go into all of the details and wouldn't talk about any live investigations, I must say as part of this report, on this particular one, a complaint was presented relating to a Northamptonshire serving councillor at the time. Within the complaint, it detailed criminal allegations and a report by the complainant that had been made to the police. Following receipt of that, I sought confirmation from the complainant to see if that had in fact been reported, which they confirmed it had, and with our close partnership working with the police, made contact with them to see that that in fact was correct, because sometimes it is said that it's been reported and hasn't. I received confirmation that it had in fact been reported to the police, and in light of their ongoing investigation, took the view that it would be inappropriate to take any further action at that point in time, so effectively suspend or put on hold any assessment of the complaint, so not as to prejudice any criminal investigation, which of course none of us would want to when it is such serious allegations being made. During the course of that complaint being presented, regular dialogue with the complainant, the subject member, the police, as well as the relevant group leader. That didn't, unfortunately, stop the media, MP inquiries, fellow councillors making inquiries, but it's important that we must protect the confidence and confidentiality of those that have made the complaint. Fortunately, the complainant had already released certain information to the press, and it was being quite well documented at the time. The police concluded their investigation and charges were brought, and running alongside that, the councillor did resign from office. And whilst that investigation remains ongoing, having had that councillor resign from office, that then removed my ability to be able to consider that as a code of conduct complaint. So as the monitoring officer, and as per our standards regime and the current law, I can only consider complaints relating to councillors who are currently in office. So upon a resignation, that extinguished my ability to consider that. That, of course, was communicated to the complainant, the retired councillor, and a statement was also provided by North Northamptonshire Council and jointly with the police on the stance taken. But it certainly causes frustration amongst members of the public, and as I say, former councillor did contact us and wished to put a question to full council about this and requested that it would be investigated. A response has been provided as to why that would not be appropriate, because this is effectively now a private individual. But something to watch, just because of that simple nuance that when they're no longer in office, that extinguishes that right. But it may be something that's subject to change. The next complaint that we received a lot of traffic into the inbox and monitoring officer side was during the pre-election period. There'd been a social media post and there'd been an allegation that there had been the offence of treating had taken place. On review of the information, it fell outside of the scope of complaints which can be considered by the monitoring officer, but as a result of the allegations making reference to possibly a breach of electoral law, we referred that to the police for their handling, as we would do on behalf of the returning officer, and also the Electoral Commission were notified, and there was no further action taken. So those were the two that we had a significant amount of traffic, and whilst they fell outside of the scope, it might be something that did catch your attention. But members of the Democracy and Standards Committee will be aware, because I feel like it's all I speak about. The standards regime has been under review for a number of years. So the regime that we currently operate within came into place in 2011, and that removed the sanctions for suspension, disqualification, and an appeals system and a standards board. That took place in 2011. In 2018, there was a review by the Committee of Standards in Public Life that recommended to government at the time that this was an area that needed reform once again, recognising that the sanctions were not sufficient and the process simply didn't work as is. I'm pleased to confirm that following the consultation that took place in January of this year, and this committee, as it was then, gave extensive feedback as part of that consultation, the government this week have announced they will be addressing the feedback from that consultation and making changes. What I'd like to just read to you some of the wording that came from the government on this. On the 11th of November, the government announced that councillors and mayors who repeatedly break the rules and commit serious misconduct will face tougher sanctions under proposals published. This will restore public confidence. Plans for a wholesale reform to the current standards regime will see government tackling widespread concerns head-on. It goes on to note that this year alone, 2 separate councillors were convicted of serious offences and remained in post until receiving prison sentences because there was no powers to suspend them. So whilst that isn't detailed within the report, because this only came out on the 11th of November, I always say I will bring you these updates as they come. So a summary of the changes that we are anticipating in law is that there'll be a mandatory code for all councils to adopt. I'm pleased to say we already have a code, and it's the model code that the Committee of Standards in Public Life recommended in work with the LGA. The introduction of a standards committee, well, guess what? We have that, thank heavens. Some councils don't. Some welcome news for monitoring officers, I'm sure, is an opportunity for an appeals and escalation. So right now, if a complaint is presented to me and I make a determination, for example, no further action, and the complainant is unhappy with that outcome, right now, that is the end of the process. And that isn't really in kilter with all of the other appeals processes or processes that you would expect in public life. If you think of the Ombudsman, for example, you make a stage 1 complaint to your local authority, a stage 2, and then you escalate to the Ombudsman. But to not have a right of appeal off the back of a standards complaint is certainly something that creates a few unhappy telephone calls after a decision notice has been issued. But I'll always act within the law. It also suggests that there's going to be sanctions imposed, which will be a suspension of up to 6 months and the provision to introduce an interim suspension of up to 3 months. Now, of course, they will be for the most serious allegations, of course, but that, I'm sure, is welcome, certainly from the feedback that came in the consultation. There will be the ability to disqualify where there's been multiple breaches and gross misconduct. So currently there are certain provisions which disqualify members from standing or remaining in office, particularly around custodial sentences and those sexual offences added more recently. But in this proposal, the government intends to introduce legislation to disqualify an elected member or co-opted member if they receive a sanction of suspension for the maximum period of 6 months twice over a 5-year period. And that's pretty radical. It's took a long time to get here and we're not there yet. So the next steps will be for the government to start pulling this together, shaping that legislation, going through the usual parliamentary process. We don't yet have a timeline in place. It is when parliamentary time will allow, which is why we will still conduct our usual reviews and our usual training, but it seems that there is some change on the horizon. So that was a little bit of new information that wasn't in the report, but I did want to bring it to you today. And thank you, Chair, for your indulgence on that. I have nothing further to add on that report. The recommendations are set out at paragraph 3.1, and I'll take any questions any members may have.
Thank you, Camilla. Councillor Doddridge?
Have you had anything back from the government yet that would suggest getting rid of the idea that once someone leaves office, that's it, investigations are over? And how is Hillsborough law going to help you with all this?
Watch this space. We don't know yet. So for the new legislation that's likely to come forward as a result of the government's announcement this week, we do hope that there'll be some really clear guidance around what can we do when a councillor leaves office. What is the expectation? I'm sure other monitoring officers like myself would welcome some guidance on that, but that does require a change in legislation. Something that we would like to see possibly, and it's talked about within the monitoring officer community, is a shift from where the presumption is. So as a councillor, for a code of conduct complaint to be within scope, you must be acting in your official capacity or giving the impression of acting in your official capacity. So that is quite difficult for the public to understand, because if you're a police officer, if you're a public servant, you're always that. You're never really off duty. So if I give the example, if I go off to Tesco this evening and I'm not wearing my lanyard and I'm not on the clock, but I commit the offence of shoplifting, that will bring my office, my role at this council into disrepute. And whether or not there's a conviction resulting in that, trust me, I'll never do it. But if there was a conviction, even if there wasn't a conviction, my professional position in this organisation would be called into question. That same principle doesn't apply to councillors. So councillors, please don't, but if you're at Tesco this evening and you're not wearing a chain of office and you're not saying, I'm a councillor, and you do that, you can remain in office if, under the current regime. But it may be that this law does change that. It does change that, where the presumption is you are at all times a councillor unless you can demonstrate you were not. That will help. It'll certainly help with some of the conversations that I have. But it is a balancing act, and we must absolutely recognise and respect the right to a private life away from official duties, of course. I think the Public Accountability Bill, soon I'm sure to become an act, the Hillsborough Law as it's referred to, is going to play a part in this. We don't know fully what it's going to look like because it isn't yet. It hasn't gone through those final stages of making its way to legislation. But in the next report that I am presenting this evening, we talk about the Ethics and Integrity Commission, and I think that body will give that guidance and that steer as to how that Public Accountability Act, if it's to come through, together with these reforms, can all be brought under one banner to make sure that we promote high ethical standards and confidence in local government and the public sector.
Thank you, Camilla. Any further queries, questions? Councillor Fairhall?
Yeah, under paragraph 4.12, you detail the number of complaints received and what happened with them. In terms of pleasingly, no assessments are required, referrals for investigation and or a hearing panel. But is that one where the assurance to us in terms of the bar is set high by us and therefore they didn't reach the standard, or the quality of the complaint was poor or spurious, in terms of where have these sort of complaints fallen? Because actually it's a lot of your time to deal with 23 complaints, and actually if that's because if we're getting lots of poor complaints, is there any way we can try and address that? And is the bar set at the right level?
It's a tricky one. The complaints haven't met that threshold that would require a referral for a standards hearing panel, for example, to be convened. And one of the considerations that I must think about, and that's not for these 23 more recent ones that are on the books, but in the past it's always been that balancing act of thinking of the sanctions and powers available to the standards hearing panel against those that I have. So it's that question of proportionality, of I can impose sanctions such as no further action, local resolution, which can take the form of an apology, training, mediation, many things, but those are the three that tend to pop up the most. And then there's the referral onto the standards panel, but the standards hearing panel have the same powers as me as the monitoring officer, with one additional power, which is currently, because we know that it might be changing, is the power of censure. So that is where we would convene a hearing panel. We would have all of the members that are part of the panel hear the views of the councillors. There'd be an investigation, an officer time, present the report. Let's say that there was a finding of a breach of code of conduct. All that the standards hearing panel can do is the no further action, local resolution or censure. Now, the power of censure is there, and it's in one of the next reports, and sometimes that does prompt councillors maybe to leave office by certain things going into the public domain. But on the complaints that we have in at the moment, they are at that quite low level. There are some that are of low quality, but we can't refuse complaints because the complainant isn't able to articulate the complaint in a manner that we would like. But what we can do is more work on our website, which we're developing, to make it sort of drop-down boxes, because, for example, I may get one that just simply said, I wish to complain, and there's no real context, or there's a bit of back and forth before it gets off the ground. But also of those where it's been a recommendation of local resolution, it's been more so the councillor has offered an apology immediately, removed a social media post. It was more that sort of, not for first offence. Councillors new to office are occasionally going to fall foul of the rules. There isn't a pattern of behaviour there that would suggest that that was something to cause concern. But of course, we keep our records available for 6 years, and we would go back and look at that if there was a pattern emerging.
Councillor Fairhall again.
Just to follow, and it is genuinely a question, not a recommendation, but in terms of those 18 that you then considered and you didn't need to pass any of them on, should we hear that 3 of those had a sanction, 7 of them had nothing, no further action? Should we hear that information within this report, or should we be satisfied with information that's included within question point 4.12?
You might have teased out a little bit from the report that I'm not entirely satisfied with the level of detail that's presented in this report, which is why I've undertaken a piece of work with our data protection officer to try and strike that balance as to how I can present that information to you so that you've got something to work with and make valuable recommendations without compromising the confidentiality of those involved in the process. We've been working on it in the background. Some of the issues that we've got is if we say we've had the complaint that maybe we were discussing in the report that came in August, let's say that councillor hadn't resigned, to put that in, it would become very apparent to members, the public, which councillor we were speaking about. Because the numbers of our complaints are not significant enough, we can't give you that sort of general view. It was probably about 5 years ago there'd been a bit of a shift because monitoring officers did used to publish the name of the town or parish council, or whether it was a principal authority, give a summary of the complaint and a summary of the outcome. But the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, has made some findings around the information that's disclosed, and there have been some legal challenges on that, which have made a number of monitoring officers sort of take that view of, well, what do I present? And the other thing is, we know that not every council has a standards committee that meet on a regular basis. But what I have done, and I think I've made reference to it in the report, is the work that I'm doing with the data protection officer to see how we can present that in a way that's safe, that you're getting all the information that you need, but we're still protecting the authority from any complaints. I have given consideration, even if we may need to move into Part B, an exempt item, and then we can discuss it a little more freely, but we still wouldn't discuss specific complaints and the details, because I wouldn't want to prejudice you should you have to hear those matters. Yeah, so work in progress. Not a recommendation, but something we've already got in progress.
Councillor Fedorovich.
Thank you, Chair. So I had a point about the 2 individual cases that were sort of raised. I mean, I think regardless of the specific instances, where we have individuals breaking the law or allegedly breaking the law, whichever the case, the fact that there's doubt there, for me as a council, we want to have councillors who are as informed as possible, and that's the whole point of this committee, is to make sure that our standards are as good as possible. So to maintain a good level of conduct for our current councillors, I think if we have an individual that is a current councillor, I would say that training would be recommended in that instance. I don't know if that has happened in these, well, for the case of the councillor that has become not a councillor anymore, that's not relevant anymore. But for any current councillors, I think that would be hopefully a fair recommendation. I think also, I did put here as well, it might be worthwhile as well opening that out to all councillors for their information. But generally, I know we tend to do that anyway. We'll tend to just run a session that's just generally available. Then the other part of this report is about just generally taking a step back and looking at how we can improve ongoing code of conduct and some things that we can do. So I wanted to mention a couple of thoughts I had. I've sort of reflected on this a little bit. So one of the first things that I thought might be helpful was actually in terms of training. I mentioned actually earlier that not every member can get to certain councillor training at certain times. I know that some of my members, myself even, have struggled with a couple of the training that have come up. E-training, I know we do tend to make briefings available online. I wondered actually if we could potentially look at having some sort of councillor scorecard for training and gamify it a little bit, just because I know gamification works. And gamifying personal development for councillors could help a little bit of like fun competitive rivalry within groups, which I think could be quite healthy and quite good. And then also in terms of just shaping culture going forward as well, we could even have an award for best conduct or something like that for councillors or most trained people who are really good at attending the training. Things like that I thought could be really interesting. Around the culture as well, I had a couple of other points. So the annual recognition was one for a sort of exemplary conduct. Also promoting examples of constructive cross-party working to encourage cultural change, I think could be really good. And promoting cross-party workshops to reduce sort of just any sort of like odd tensions and build those better working relationships as well. I've talked to Adele Wiley about some potential things around the Big 50 that I think could be really good. And the last sort of point, I have some suggestions for things for training, but I won't mention all of those. I think I'll just email those. But the last thing was about potentially a mentor scheme and partnering newer councillors with a senior colleague. Is that already? It's already lovely. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Camilla, do you want to come back?
Training, we did our induction programme and that was intense. That was intense for you all. And everybody learns in different ways, and we're doing sort of lunchtime sessions, lunch and learn focuses. We're going to try bite-size videos. It's trying to get a willing volunteer in front of a camera, not me. It's difficult, but we may even have an AI bot do that for us. But that's an extra something coming forward. The e-training, absolutely, and the big thing that we're wanting to do when we're running a pilot, so all group leaders should have had an email saying, can you give us a nomination for somebody within your group who might benefit from more closer working, and we're just trying to see what that would look like with that sort of test group, and the intention is to then roll that out. What we're looking to do is start to bring our members into the space of understanding our values that we talk about as officers, and you'll see splattered everywhere and on our backgrounds and our teams. But sometimes we haven't always embedded our values and behaviours with our members. So we're hoping with this pilot group we can start to see what that looks like using the officer model in the councillor space. Councillor awards is what I've written down there of most improved councillor, that sort of thing. I think I'll have to look to members for how that would work, because officers I certainly couldn't get involved in giving gold star. As long as there isn't a best councillor, worst councillor, I'll definitely be out of a job.
Thank you, Camilla. Councillor Mundy.
Thank you, Chair. Just first of all, I wanted to say thank you very much for that comprehensive introduction into the potential new rules which are coming into place, and I think from a personal point of view I welcome them from what you've said. I think it's probably long overdue, particularly the appeals process. I think that's pretty much standard in most things, particularly in the HR world anyway. And then just to draw your attention to section 5.4 of the report, it says here that there's been a fall in the amount of complaints deemed to be falling under political speech. I think that's actually probably a good thing. And then it outlines case law in bullet points from Article 10. I think one of the good things that Article 10 actually does is protect political speech. But would it not be perhaps a good idea to include some of this within the Constitution itself to prevent any further, any future complaints which would potentially fall under the freedom of speech provisions and be no further action?
Thank you. Yes, Camilla.
Yes, we have seen other councils start to adopt that approach. Those in particular who receive very, very high volumes of complaints, and I'm saying in the hundreds in a very short space of time. And you may well know the council concerned. And they have made amendments to their constitution to reflect that. At this point in time, because we don't have that issue, thank goodness, and touch wood, we're able to still consider them, and it's quite a simple exercise because it is finding that balance of protecting those freedoms, but actually if it may cross that line of bullying, harassment, intimidation in public office. So I wouldn't want to say an absolute blanket that it's always going to be Article 10 and almost turn people away saying it's not worth making it because a remark in the chamber can be offensive and it would be protected. But I do think that the legislation coming forward might give some guidance around that, and it's certainly something I'll keep under review. When we review our arrangements as part of that informal exercise, happy to take views, and if we've noticed a trend, then maybe that is something we should be addressing. But at this point in time, they're not so significant that is the case. But maybe if I was the monitoring officer of the other council which is experiencing some difficulties on that, I may have took a similar view.
Thank you, Camilla. Any further queries or questions for the monitoring officer? Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Chair. Reference suspensions, is there any circumstances that may occur where you would consider suspending a councillor before there was a result of an investigation?
So right now that power doesn't exist, but as per the government announcement, yes, that is absolutely, that's what the interim suspension is likely to look like. So there will be a test, and it will be a legal test, no doubt, and it will ask if there's a threshold that's been met, and absolutely would expect that that's going to be in consultation with the standards committee, the independent person, and in those instances where it is so significant, pending investigation, but the impact that it might have for that member to remain in office or to be seen to be in office, that power of suspension will exist on an interim basis for up to 3 months is what is said. And I hope that the government will also give some guidance around when the what steps monitoring officers should do, or principal authorities if it's going to be considered by a standards committee, what regard they need to give to an ongoing criminal investigation, because we know that there can be some very, very, very serious criminal investigations that can take, sadly, years to come to trial, and in that time a 3-month suspension and disqualification would be fine, but it's how do you get to that point if you've got a lengthy trial date in the future. So still plenty to work through. What I would say is we can't underplay the benefit of the work within groups. So yes, we have the standards regime, but we look to your group whips and how you manage your group discipline as well. What we have found is there have been a number of councillors who've left their party and gone independent, and especially where the standards related matters, less so certainly not at this council, but I've seen it elsewhere, and I know that it has happened where their political party have said we do not tolerate this behaviour, they've removed the whip, they've crossed the floor and they've gone independent, but that they're still in office, they're still turning up at council meetings. So hopefully these changes that are imminent, and that I won't hopefully be talking about it as imminent this time next year, and it will start to come to realisation, will go some way to address that.
Thank you, Camilla. Councillor Mundy again. Oh, sorry, Councillor McLean, you want to follow up? Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to reply to that because in the situation where maybe there's been a vexatious complaint and somebody may possibly be suspended initially. And the reason why I asked the question, because I could call it a victim of that when I worked in the prison service and vexatious complaints, and I was suspended for about a year. And at the end of it, it was proven to be vexatious by a prison. But it's just there's got to be a balance there about not making, not dive into a sort of answer straight away without obviously getting some of the facts together. And just one final thing. What is the offence of treating? I've got no idea.
So it's effectively to supply goods, in this instance food, during the pre-election period, so to induce votes. Yes, there were a few reports across the country. There was a councillor who had an ice cream van a little way down the road during the election, not in this area, and that wasn't the offensive treatment. It's when we've spoke to the Electoral Commission on this, it's quite an old piece of legislation and maybe doesn't reflect sort of the modern world as we know it now. But the legislation still exists, and people, of course, are right to bring any concerns to either myself or the police or the Electoral Commission, especially at that time.
Thank you, Camilla. Councillor Mundy.
I think I remember seeing somebody getting dragged through the media for party sausages at one time. But back to more serious matters. So 5.7 of the report says there is a consistent theme with social media, an increase around complaints with social media now. I know from my experience that the way people conduct themselves online can often be taken in the incorrect way because you can't determine somebody's body language, the way they present themselves, etc. So would it not be a great idea again to lower potentially the amount of complaints that come through to issue some guidance around social media if there isn't any already?
Camilla.
So we do have some guidance for our members, and it's absolutely something that we should just be doing periodically as reminders, because I think that we're here to help you as well. And rarely is it malicious. It's often misguided. It's a like of a post, but then it's linked back to something else. And it's always worth just making sure that we remind councillors about that. Next week we have fraud awareness particular work which is taking sort of priority for the comm side, but we could look to do something before the year's out to just circulate with our members. I'm just very aware of how many emails and notifications you get from officers, and sometimes I worry you might become a bit word blind with it all.
Thank you, Camilla. Any further questions or queries? I'll just make one observation. Obviously, any legislation will then need to be incorporated into the council constitution. And on the practical note, there will be the issue of what happens in a one councillor ward if that councillor is suspended, because then where do the residents turn for their ward work? Obviously, in a two or three councillor ward, that issue doesn't necessarily arise. But that is again just it's a practicality that is going to come up at some stage in a council. Right, well, if we don't have any further questions or queries for the monitoring officer, then you have the recommendation at item 3 of the report, which is to A, note the updates contained within the report, and to B, provide any feedback to the monitoring officer on further work arising from the reports. Can I have a proposer for the report, please? Councillor Dudridge. And a seconder, Councillor Munday. Shall we now vote on the recommendation? Councillor Fairhall, if you're happy that you've heard enough of the debate to vote, then. So if we can have a show of hands for those in favour of the report. Unanimous. Thank you. We will now move on to the next report, which again will be presented by our monitoring officer. Thank you, Camilla.
Thank you, and I'll try and keep it brief. clearly my passion for all things standards. Just, I don't want to occupy the floor all evening. So this report is to update you on the national picture, so what's going on, updates such as the government announcement, which wasn't available at the time of publication. First bit of news that I wanted to bring to you is the setting up of the Ethics and Integrity Commission, which replaces the Committee of Standards in Public Life. That commission, the EIC, became operational on the 13th of October, and this was part of the government's pledge to set up a new body to promote high standards in public life, ethical standards, and this goes to ministers, public officials, and we're already possibly seeing some of that work coming out of that commission as a result of the changes that have been announced this week. It replaces the Committee of Standards in Public Life, taking over and expanding its remit. But what I must highlight is that it does not investigate, or it's not intended to investigate specific cases of impropriety or specific individuals. The Commission isn't going to be seen to be a regulator, but let's see what comes in the legislation as to whether there is going to be an established appeals body in relation to standards. The next couple of things that I just wanted to bring to your attention are some activities happening in other councils elsewhere in the country. So Hounslow Council, back in July 25, a councillor attended a meeting of the licensing panel and voted on a licensing application. The councillor in error had believed that he was a member of the committee. He attended, he voted, and he had, as a result of the incorrect delegations or the delegations not being in place, he wasn't actually recognised as a member of the committee, which meant that the decision was void and the item needed to be considered afresh. This was because there had been an absence of the delegation within the Constitution. So essentially, to be put onto a committee, that was a decision of full council. Whereas at Northamptonshire, I just want to give this reassurance, we make our appointments at full council in May, but there is a provision that those changes to any committees can be made during the year by the leader notifying me as the monitoring officer, and then the necessary changes being made. That delegation didn't exist there. So whilst that member in very good faith had believed that he was going to be appointed, he'd slightly jumped the gun and voted at a meeting, rendering the decision void, and they had to reconsider it. The next item is Basildon Borough Council, and I've brought this one to you to really just highlight the importance of observing the role of an officer and the role of a member, and making sure that those roles are distinguished and the member officer protocol is in place so that we can promote workplace safety for our staff and maintain a secure and respectful working environment. There are instances that we have seen over the years where councillors have slipped into that officer space and attended officer desks and made demands, you will do this, you will do that. It was pretty bad for a little while, and I'm not talking about this council, but nationally there were those sort of blurring of lines, but a lot of work went into it and with the LGA to make sure that's really, really clear, which is why you hear a lot about the member officer protocol. And then we have Wolverhampton City Council, and this is one that is one of the rare cases where it's been referred to a standards hearing panel, and the panel have imposed sanctions, one of which being censure, which is how we were able to get our hands on this decision. So the allegations concerned a councillor and his military service, or said military service. He had said that he had served as a Royal Marine, but that was not the case, and that was found following complaints and an investigation. This was referred to a subcommittee, so the same as our hearing panel, and the subcommittee noted that the councillor had had multiple opportunities to correct this during the investigation, but hadn't. The subcommittee concluded that he had not served as a Royal Marine, he had not completed his training or passed out, and could not call himself a Royal Marine Commando. The subcommittee concluded that there had been a breach of the Code of Conduct, which the relevant paragraphs are listed in the report, and they did impose some sanctions. Interestingly, that committee recognised the limited powers available to it under the Localism Act, and that the powers are limited, and that the government has recently committed to an increase in sanctions available to it. The sanctions that they did impose, it was a public apology, a recommendation made to the leader that the councillor is removed from the various panels, to advise the leader of the outcome of that, and that the decision is published and reports the findings to full council. So that's where your censure element kicks in. So that's quite a rare report. You don't see many that go to a standard T-ring panel, and certainly not those that then reach into the public domain. So that's a summary of the report there. I trust that members have had an opportunity to read that in advance, and if any members have any questions or observations, the recommendations are set out in paragraph 3.1, I believe, and I'll take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Camilla. Any questions or queries? Nope. Okay, so we can... You have the recommendation on item 3 of the report, which is to note the national picture update in relation to ethical standards and councillor conduct, and B, to consider any steps or actions arising from this report to promote ethical standards and councillor conduct within Northamptonshire. Can I have a proposer for the report, please? Councillor Mundy, thank you, and a seconder, and Councillor Duddridge, thank you. So if we can now move to a vote on the recommendation. Those in favour of the report? Unanimous. Oops, sorry, yeah. Thank you, Camilla and members. That now brings us to the close of business. There being no urgent business, I will now close the meeting at 8:17, I believe. 8:17. Thank you. Thank you all.